Welcome to Whispers and Confessions. There might be a twist waiting, so please make sure to watch until the end. Don't forget to subscribe and like. Let's begin right away.
As his arms wrapped around my waist, my body melted into his touch. His hands slipped under my clothes, exploring my skin with a hungry tenderness. When his fingers brushed the inside of my thighs, a fiery thrill shot up my spine. His breath against my neck made me tremble, and the low moan he let out as he kissed my ear drove me wild. Michael explored my body slowly but with purpose. When his hands cupped my breasts, his thumbs gently teasing sensitive spots, I gasped and gripped his shoulders tightly. His lips trailed down my neck, leaving a burning path, and his hands moved to the most intimate parts of me. His fingers moved gently but rhythmically inside me, and I gave myself entirely to the surging waves of ecstasy. The sensations grew more intense, and Michael, never missing a cue, pushed me further, deeper until I was consumed by ecstasy. Hello. My name is Pamela, and I'm a woman in my early 50s. Last year, my husband James and I moved back to my hometown, Winfield, Kansas, to embrace a simpler, rural farming life. It's the kind of peaceful small town where you wake up to the sound of roosters crowing from the outskirts of town and watch the sun set over wide open fields, casting a warm red glow across the sky. We had a deeply personal reason for leaving our life in New York to settle here. James, my husband, worked as a banker his entire life. He was the quintessential workaholic, always dressed in a sharp suit, carrying a heavy briefcase, leaving home early in the morning and coming back late at night. On top of that, he was cold and emotionally distant, seeming completely unaware of how to understand or care about people's feelings. In the early years of our marriage, I hoped he might change, but after we had our 2 sons, our marriage was, for all intents and purposes, over. To be honest, I'm someone with a passionate nature, and physical intimacy is a vital part of who I am. But James always dismissed my needs with constant excuses about being too busy, ignoring my loneliness. When I was younger, I tried to fill that void by having a few clandestine, fleeting affairs with other men. They didn't last long. I felt guilty, and more than anything, seeing my children's faces made it impossible to continue those relationships. James, on the other hand, spent years visiting nightclubs under the guise of work-related socializing. We both pretended not to notice each other's actions, living as if we were still a married couple for over 30 years, never asking questions. Then, one day, devastating news struck us out of nowhere. James was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer. The moment I heard those words, it felt like my heart sank to my stomach. Even though we had grown emotionally distant, he was still the person who had shared half my life. At the hospital, the doctor spoke to me. "Pamela, I'm sorry to say this, but we found a large tumor in his colon. It's progressed to what looks like stage 3. What can we do? Is surgery possible?" I asked, my voice trembling. The doctor replied calmly, "The tumor is too large for immediate surgery. We'll need to start with chemotherapy to shrink it before considering surgery." Is there a chance for a full recovery?" I asked, my eyes filled with desperation. "There's hope," he said, "but the treatment will be tough. He'll need to take good care of his health." From that day on, I visited every church and chapel I could, desperate for answers, praying for James's life. I begged and cried. Ironically, as James fought his illness, we gradually began to reconnect. I was grateful just to have him alive and by my side. Thankfully, James endured the chemotherapy well. But his body visibly weakened, he lost weight, his hair fell out, and his strength wasn't what it used to be. Watching him suffer was absolutely heart-wrenching. But then, a miracle happened. We got news that the tumor had shrunk significantly after chemo, and he was able to undergo surgery successfully. The day the surgery was over, I collapsed in a hospital hallway, sobbing uncontrollably with my shoulders trembling. That's when it hit me. Nothing matters more than health. From then on, my only thought was to live the rest of our lives healthily for each other. So I took James's hand and we moved back to my hometown of Winfield, where the air is fresh and the water is crystal clear. Leaving behind the hectic pace of New York felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. In the mornings, roosters crowed from the outskirts of town, the breeze rustled through the fields by the creek, and in the afternoons, the distant hum of a tractor filled the air. At night, I'd look up at a sky so full of stars it felt like they were spilling over, and I'd think, this is what living feels like. There were no urgent tasks, no one to hurry or push. At first, the slow pace felt strange, but after a few days, I came to cherish that slowness. Then one day, while I was out shopping in town, I ran into someone unexpected. "Oh my gosh, is that Michael?" I blurted out without thinking. "Pamela? What are you doing here?" Michael looked at me, just as surprised. In that moment, my heart thudded in my chest. Michael was my first love, and the first man I'd ever shared that kind of intimacy with 30 years ago. Seeing Michael's face brought back memories I'd buried deep inside. We grew up in the same neighborhood, splashing and playing in the creek, running through the fields, and playing hide-and-seek in the barn on rainy days. Back then, Michael was always looking out for me, standing up to anyone who tried to bother me. He was kind and steadfast. Then, when I was 20, during a summer festival in August, something unforgettable happened. It was a night when the moonlight glowed brightly. Michael and I were walking quietly by the creek, the gentle murmur of the creek and crickets chirping in the background. As we walked in silence, Michael suddenly grabbed my hand. My heart raced wildly as we kept walking, eventually reaching an old barn at the edge of town. "Pamela, should we do it here?" Michael's voice was trembling. Those words made my heart race wildly. I felt short of breath, my face flushed with heat, but I didn't mind at all. It felt like something I'd been waiting for. I nodded silently. Michael looked at me for a long moment before gently pulling me into his arms. Inside that old barn, we held each other. Outside, the gentle murmur of the creek flowed, and the crickets sang into the deepening night. Michael looked at me tenderly, kissing my forehead several times as he said, "Pamela, I'll take care of you and protect you forever." It was all clumsy and awkward, yet tender, but in that moment, it was just the two of us in our own world. But that joy didn't last long, and we couldn't foresee the trouble it would stir up. Soon after, I found out I was pregnant with Michael's child. From that moment, everything started to crumble around me. My family was thrown into complete turmoil. My father's face turned red with rage as he bellowed, and my mother collapsed in the kitchen, sobbing. The reason? Michael's family and mine had been enemies for years. Michael's father had borrowed a large sum of money from my father and disappeared without paying it back. That betrayal left a permanent scar on my father's heart. So when he found out I was pregnant with Michael's child, his rage and anguish were only natural. "Daddy, I'm so sorry." "But Michael's a good person," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "A girl who's not even married dares to do something so shameful? How will you show your face in this town?" My father bellowed. "I'll live quietly with our child. Please, just give us your blessing." "Get a grip, you fool. You think I'd let you be with someone from that family after what they did? You need to get rid of it now." His rage was boundless. "Daddy, I can't live without Michael." "Shut up. You two will never be together. Not even if I'm dead." My mother cried every night in front of me, and Michael tried to protect me. "Sir, I'll take responsibility for Pamela." "I'll marry her," Michael said, kneeling before my father. But my father's eyes held no forgiveness. "Your father ruined our family, and you think I'd give my daughter to someone like you?" My father chased Michael away, and I was forbidden from leaving the house. Maybe it was the stress, but heartbreakingly, I miscarried not long after. I had to let go of the precious child I carried before it could even be born. After that, Michael stopped coming to see me. I suspect my family's pressure was too much for him. My parents wouldn't have let him near me. They probably warned him to stay away from their daughter. Michael disappeared without a trace after that, not by the creek, not in the fields, nowhere. We loved each other, but we had no choice but to turn our backs on one another. Not long after, my mother abruptly sent me to my aunt's house in New York. There, I got a job in a factory, living amid the constant noise of machines. In the whirlwind of those chaotic days, my mother and aunt arranged for me to meet James, and under the relentless pressure from the adults, I married him. That's how I lived for 30 years. When I returned to my hometown, I ran into Michael again, like it was meant to be. Even after all those years, Michael's clear, honest eyes hadn't changed. His weathered hands and lined forehead bore the marks of time, but his eyes still twinkled with a boyish spark when he smiled. "Michael, it's been forever. How have you been? Are you okay?" I couldn't hold back my joy. Michael told me he'd returned to our hometown to cultivate organic herbs. I tried my hand at business for a while, but after a few failures, I ended up working the land. "Guess I can't escape my farmer father's blood," he said with a laugh, though a fleeting shadow of loneliness passed over his face. I told him how James's illness led us to leave everything behind and move back here. Michael nodded quietly for a while. After that day, we started running into each other often. It turned out his house was less than a 10-minute drive from mine. At first, our greetings were awkward, but after a few smiles and casual chats, it felt as comfortable as it did when we were kids. Michael would sometimes bring me rare herbs, saying, "Have James try them." I sweated buckets picking these in the mountains. At first, James drank the herbal tea gladly, but when he found out it came from Michael, he flatly refused. "I'm not touching anything from that guy," he snapped, his tone blunt. I could tell he didn't like how close I was getting to Michael. But I didn't let it bother me and kept spending time with Michael. We walked through fields blooming with wildflowers, and I watched him tend to his herb garden. Michael's body was trim and powerfully built, not from a gym, but from years of toiling in the fields and carrying heavy sacks of herbs. His forearms were lined with subtle veins, and his arms, visible under his short sleeves, were sturdy. On top of that, Michael was thoughtful, never missing even the smallest things I said. "Pamela, I brought some roasted potatoes. Eat them while they're hot." "Potatoes? What's this about?" I asked, surprised. "You said you were craving roasted potatoes earlier today." "Oh my gosh, I just mentioned it in passing. You roasted these yourself?" "Yup. After years of farming, this is nothing." I couldn't just ignore what you said. His kindness touched me deeply. James always dismissed my words as a bother, but Michael was different. At some point, just seeing him made my heart feel full, and I began to feel a flutter of excitement again. One weekend evening, Michael called me. "Pamela, want to have dinner at my place tonight? My wife's coming down from New York. Bring James if he feels like coming." Michael's wife, Catherine, was a nurse at a university hospital in New York, and they lived apart during the week because she was busy raising their teenage daughter. She didn't come to Winfield often, but she happened to be there that day. I hesitated before asking James, "Honey, how about we go together?" Normally, James wouldn't give anything related to Michael a second thought, but surprisingly, he agreed right away. It seemed the mention of a new woman sparked his interest. When we arrived at Michael's house, I heard bright, cheerful laughter. Catherine was waving from a bench in the yard, her smile warm and glowing. She was livelier and more approachable than I'd expected, with neatly tied hair, a casual t-shirt and jeans, and a lively, healthy energy. "Oh, finally meeting you. I've heard so much about you, Pamela," Catherine said, beaming. She chatted effortlessly with James, too. He seemed to relax as she empathized with his struggles as a cancer patient. Catherine's warm, engaging manner steered the conversation with warmth. "After surgery, you might feel drained sometimes. Don't push yourself too hard. Rest when you need to." After that evening, our two couples started hanging out often. Catherine said she couldn't come down often because of her daughter, but after that, she showed up every weekend without fail. James clearly anticipated her visits. In her presence, a subtle smile would tug at his lips, and he'd talk more than usual. Watching him, I thought, he's secretly excited for Catherine to come. The more I noticed this, the more I was seething inside. It felt like Catherine was stealing my time with Michael. But the funny thing was, ironically, James was the one reaping the rewards. I was seething inside, but James seemed more lively and talkative. Then, one day, James had a checkup scheduled in New York. Catherine happened to mention she was heading there, too. "I can drop you off at the hospital on my way," she offered, and James nodded eagerly, as if he'd been waiting for her to say it. He said he'd stay overnight at our son's place and come back the next day. I said okay, but inside, I was secretly overjoyed. This was my chance to spend time alone with Michael. Soon after, I got a text from him. "Pamela, want to sit on my balcony tonight and look at the stars?" I put on light clothes and slipped out of the house. As I drove with the windows down, the crisp rural evening breeze caressed my cheeks, and I felt the same excitement I did at 18. When I arrived at Michael's yard, a soft light glowed on his balcony. Michael waved, welcoming me under the warm yellow glow. The night sky was bursting with stars, so stunning that I gazed at them, completely captivated. "Looking at the stars reminds you of old times, doesn't it?" Michael said, handing me a glass of soju with a smile. "Yeah, it does," I replied, feeling shy as I took the glass. We passed the glass back and forth, talking openly. We laughed at silly things and sometimes just listened to the sound of the breeze. As we drank, a warm flush spread through me and a pleasant buzz set in. Michael set his glass down and spoke, his voice soft. "Pamela, I've thought about you sometimes. Running around together as kids, and that night in the barn when we first made love. It's still as vivid as if it happened yesterday." "Oh my gosh, me too," I said, my face flushed with heat. That night 30 years ago was still crystal clear. Especially the way Michael's strong body felt under the moonlight, his overwhelming presence that left me dizzy. "It's getting chilly. Want to go inside for another drink?" Michael asked, holding out his hand. I followed him into his house. The living room was filled with a snug, comforting warmth, but there was a subtle tension in the air. We sat side by side on an old couch, and Michael's hand gently traced along my jawline. His touch was warm and steady, and when his lips brushed my cheek, they were soft but trembling with longing. That kiss wasn't just physical. As his tongue lightly grazed my lips, entwining with mine, a long-suppressed desire flared to life within me. Unlike James, who treated intimacy like a chore, Michael was attentive and deliberate. He attuned himself to every response of my body, deepening the pleasure with every breath I took. His slender build concealed powerful muscles, and the overwhelming presence I felt in that barn 30 years ago was still there, stronger, even with the weight of time. As his arms wrapped around my waist, my body melted into his touch. His hands slipped under my clothes, exploring my skin with a hungry tenderness. When his fingers brushed the inside of my thighs, a fiery thrill shot up my spine. His breath against my neck made me tremble, and the low moan he let out as he kissed my ear drove me wild. Michael explored my body slowly but with purpose. When his hands cupped my breasts, his thumbs gently teasing sensitive spots, I gasped and gripped his shoulders tightly. His lips trailed down my neck, leaving a burning path, and his hands moved to the most intimate parts of me. His fingers moved gently but rhythmically inside me, and I gave myself entirely to the surging waves of ecstasy. The sensations grew more intense, and Michael, never missing a cue, pushed me further, deeper until I was consumed by ecstasy. Finally, his body moved over mine. His firm chest pressed against my skin, his heat enveloping me. His eyes burned with desire and affection, and in that moment, I could feel his heartbeat echoing inside me. As he entered me, I trembled, overwhelmed by the fullness. His movements were slow and deep at first, then faster, driving me toward a peak of pleasure. My body moved in sync with his rhythm, his hands gripping my waist as he filled me completely. The pleasure built until it exploded inside me, and I cried out his name, my entire body trembling. In that moment, it was just the two of us in the world. Michael reached his climax soon after, his hot breath and low groans filling my ears. We collapsed into each other's arms, drenched in sweat and enveloped in warmth, listening to the sound of our breathing. That night, with my face pressed against Michael's strong chest, listening to his heartbeat, I felt a joy that fulfilled a deep, long-held longing. The physical pleasure was more than just satisfaction. It was a profound liberation that rejuvenated my very soul. His touch, his breath, everything about him brought me back to life. Under the star-filled rural sky, we reignited a love we'd long buried, and my body was reborn with vivid memories of pleasure I'd forgotten. But the next day, I found myself standing in front of Michael's house, as if pulled by some irresistible force. "Pamela, what's up? Did you forget something?" Michael asked, surprised. "No, Michael. I think I'm going crazy. I can't get you out of my mind since last night. What do I do?" That night with Michael was like a powerful addiction. His strong body, his gentle touch, his deep gaze, they unleashed a longing I'd kept locked away. Decades of unfulfilled desires surged through me because of him. But when Catherine came down on weekends, guilt weighed heavily on me. I could barely meet her eyes when she smiled brightly. "Pamela, you look even prettier lately. New makeup?" Catherine asked with a laugh. "Oh no, it's probably just the country air," I replied awkwardly. I promised myself over and over, this is going to cause trouble. I tried to distance myself from Michael, but my heart refused to obey. Every night, I melted in his arms, soaked in bliss. "Pamela, was it good?" Michael whispered. "Oh, why do you ask? Isn't it obvious?" I laughed, playfully hitting his chest. "I just wanted to make sure. I want my Pamela to be happy. With you, I feel like I have the whole world." The moment I saw him again, it felt like our fate was sealed. 30 years ago, we let go of each other's hands, but we never forgot, and now we were drawn back together. Around that time, James started going to New York more often. At first, he said he was visiting friends or staying at our son's place. I wondered if he was getting stronger. But something felt off. James, who never saw anyone after his surgery, suddenly had plans and stayed overnight frequently. I had an uneasy feeling but didn't dwell on it, partly because it left me freer to see Michael. One morning, James left the house at dawn. "Where are you going so early?" I asked, rubbing sleepy eyes. "I'm heading to New York to go hiking with a friend." "Honey, aren't you pushing yourself too hard? Are you sure you're okay? It's not like I'm climbing a mountain. I'll be back tomorrow." "Why are you staying overnight so much lately?" You need to take care of yourself. I know my body. I'm fine. I waved him off and went back to bed, but I noticed his phone on the nightstand. He never left without it. Just then, the screen lit up with a text notification. I glanced at it and saw a familiar name, Catherine. My mind reeled. With trembling hands, I opened the message and found a string of sweet nothings between lovers. Appa, I'll be waiting for you today. Last night was so wonderful. At that moment, the front door burst open. James rushed in, out of breath. Honey, did you see my phone? I held it up, my voice cold. What is this? He stiffened for a moment before snatching it from me. Why are you looking at my phone? You've been sneaking around with Catherine, haven't you? What are you talking about? Be honest. I saw the texts. James hesitated, then lowered his head. It wasn't like that at first. She was just helping me with hospital visits and keeping me company. But now it is, right? That's why you're going to see her. Let's be real, we've been living like strangers for years. I want to find my own happiness. His words made it feel like decades of our life came crashing down. I was cheating with Michael, but the sting of betrayal and hollow emptiness hit me hard. Fine. This is it then. Let's get a divorce. Okay, he said quietly, his voice heavy with exhaustion and resignation. James left without another word. I sat there, dazed, unsure whether to laugh or cry. We'd both been cheating, swapping partners to soothe our loneliness. The betrayal stung, but part of me felt calm, as if I'd always sensed this day would come. Without a second thought, I rushed to Michael and told him everything. He gazed at me in silence for a while, then nodded. I knew about them. Last time I was in New York, I went to Catherine's place unannounced and saw them in bed together. What? Why didn't you tell me? James begged me not to say anything. He said he'd tell you when the moment was right. I didn't expect it to come out like this, but maybe this is a blessing in disguise. Michael suggested we start fresh. We both decisively ended our marriages, James, and I got a divorce through mutual agreement, and Michael quietly parted ways with Catherine. No one caused a scene. It was like setting down a heavy burden we'd carried for too long. I felt some regret and guilt thinking of our kids, so Michael and I agreed to be honest with them when the timing felt natural. Once the divorce was finalized, I felt unexpectedly liberated. It was a long relationship, but letting it go lifted a weight from my heart. Perhaps this was always our destiny. Recently, James called to tell me he was marrying Catherine. He'd already told our kids everything and announced his remarriage confidently. I haven't told my kids about Michael yet, but James's quick decisions were so typical of him. I just said, "Wishing you a good life," and left it at that. Lately, I've been realizing that life doesn't always follow a set path. Not knowing where it's headed makes it more exhilarating and deeply meaningful. Thank you for listening to my story. Have a great day.